Well, good morning. I'm Mike Snyder, one of the technology reporters at USA Today, and I want to welcome you to day 2 at CES. Thanks for being patient coming in, and thank you for coming to our panel on self-driving cars. You know, if this isn't the hottest topic at CES, it's certainly one of the hottest topics. And we have a great panel today who's going to help us talk about the future and where we're going, where we're likely headed in the world of vehicles with driver assistance features and the future of fully autonomous vehicles. Now, this is a market that is set to explode, in part because auto and tech industries are driving it, but also because consumers want it. As many as 12 million autonomous vehicles will be on the road worldwide by 2025, innovation that will create a $42 billion annual industry, according to the Boston Consulting Group. And the potential savings from injury and fatality prevention, coupled with increased productivity, could account for more than $1 trillion annually in the United States, Morgan Stanley has estimated. Here in the United States, IHS Autonomous Research finds that deployment of autonomous vehicles will number in the thousands in 2020, growing to nearly 4.5 million sold in 2035. Globally, they say there'll be 21 million vehicles deployed by then. So we're talking about a future potentially with millions of autonomous vehicles on the roads in the fairly near future. As for interest in self-driving cars, a recent Consumer Technology Association poll found that 60% of US consumers are interested in purchasing an automated vehicle, and 70% would be willing to test drive one. I got my first chance to do so this week here in Vegas. Now, our panel today is going to help us get through the roadmap to how do we get to this future. John Chen is Executive Chairman and CEO of BlackBerry, whose QNX software is in over 60 million connected cars today. And just 2 weeks ago, the company launched an innovation center for connected and autonomous vehicles in Ottawa, Ontario, to accelerate the development of connected and self-driving cars. Doug Davis is Senior Vice President and General Manager of the Automated Driving Group at Intel. Earlier this week, Intel made several announcements that should advance its autonomous driving goals. A self-driving system being demonstrated here at CES by Delphi uses Intel chips and sensors made by Mobileye. Also this week, Intel announced that it plans to invest in high-definition mapping firm HERE, which is developing autonomous driving hardware and software platforms that could serve as a standard for other innovators to adapt. Or adopt. They could adopt it also. Dr. Itay Ghat is Senior Vice President of Production Programs at Mobileye, which I just mentioned. And they are working with Intel and Delphi on that demonstration that's here at CES. And Mobileye is also working with Intel to help BMW deploy 40 self-driving BMWs by the second half of 2017. So, Mr. Chen, I did not mention that BlackBerry is working with Ford on self-driving cars and autonomous features. Tell us a bit about what's going on with you and Ford and what you guys are trying to do.
Okay, sure. So good morning. First of all, there's a lot of things about our contract with Ford that I am officially not allowed to mention. So, but we actually are working with many car manufacturers around the world on autonomous driven car. Multiple stages of there. If you come to our booth, you'll see a number of technology displayed. You spoke earlier about our 60 million car installations, and they are more in the connected car category. You know, I assume that autonomous driven car, our definition here is self-driving, or some version or some layer of self-driving, and maybe there are human intervention that's needed, and we can talk about that later, about what the definitions are. But we are in 60 million cars running around the world, mostly in infotainment systems. Ford uses our infotainment system for the Sync 3. So if you all have a Ford or buy a Ford or lease a Ford and rent one, starting from the 2016 model, which is on the road right now, all BlackBerry technology on that and the infotainment system. So we have branched out to telematics and vehicle-to-vehicle communications, to safeties, to a whole bunch of things, and mostly centered around security. So Ford and us are working on that and the expansion of that into their concept cars going forward in the autonomous driven world.
Gotcha. Mr. Davis, I referenced Intel's announcements from earlier this week. Can you give us a bit of insight into what Intel's doing and how the company hopes to move the industry forward?
Great. So thanks, Mike. Thanks, everyone, for being here and spending a bit of time with us. Certainly an exciting topic. There are a couple things that we announced this week at CES. The first is a new Intel brand called Intel Go. It comprehends the work that we're doing from an autonomous standpoint that looks at what's required in the vehicle, the connectivity for the vehicle, and then the role that the data center plays in being able to provide that kind of a solution. So we really think about this as the car, the connectivity, and the cloud that's necessary for an artificial intelligence kind of solution, which all of these vehicles really are going to need to be in order to provide that fully self-driving capability. So this brand really is comprehending what we're doing in terms of the development platform, the compute that goes in the vehicle. There's an element of that, a development platform for 5G to let developers start today building in the 5G connectivity that they'll need. And then the software development kit that goes with all that to help developers begin to create that training behavioral model in the cloud and the ability to put that inference into a car. You also reference what we've done in terms of the investment in here. And really that's kind of along the same model. It gives us the opportunity to work together with them to look at the ways that the data associated with these maps gets aggregated and stored and optimized, and then the way in which those maps get delivered into the vehicle. It's a key ingredient in order to enable these cars to be able to navigate around autonomously. But at the same time, we'll work with them and the OEMs to look at the ways that those maps evolve over time and then get deployed into the cars through the network infrastructure. So those are important aspects of how Intel is approaching the autonomous vehicle. It's really all of those elements, the car, the connectivity, and the cloud.
And Dr. Gott, your company, Mobileye, is working on multiple projects in this field, including, with Intel. Tell us a bit about what your company's doing here at CES.
Hello. So, good morning, everybody, and thank you for helping us being on this exciting topic. Before going into describing what we're doing, I want to say something about the way that we're doing things, because the collaboration that you just mentioned is somewhat different than the regular way that things are working in the automotive industry, because what we were actually doing is we formed a partnership in order to accelerate the development of autonomous vehicle. And furthermore, we're doing that in an inclusive manner, allowing for further partners to join in, and we are looking forward for that to happen. Now, looking at the actual work that we're doing, we do see basically three pillars that are relevant for autonomous driving. And one of them is the natural extension of what we've been doing for many years, meaning ADAS. ADAS was monocular camera, preventing accidents. Moving to autonomous driving, one needs to provide vision 360 degrees around the vehicle, and we're doing that by providing 8 cameras that are sensing the world, providing a completely new level of sensing. That's one pillar. The other element that we see as another layer of redundancy is mapping, and we are providing that via the unique capability that we call RAM, Road Experience Management, that allow us to keep the vital information of where we are located and where we would like to go. We are doing that by using basically the same infrastructure, hence no cost added that is used today for ADAS system. We are sending the basic information about landmarks, lane marks on the road, everything that should be able to help us locate ourselves to a cloud, and there, in an automatic process, that data is processed into what we call roadbook, which later can be used to locate the vehicle. And the last element that we see is something that is not handled today almost at all, is the ability to provide a driving policy, which is the answer of how to allow robotic vehicles, autonomous vehicle, to merge into regular traffic that, in a way that would allow them to continue driving without just clogging the roads. All of that is kind of exciting for us, because if 2 years ago, when we went public, we were just doing ADAS monocular, now we extended that and we are moving fast into the autonomous domain, and we are doing all these kind of new activities. I'd be glad, if possible, that's something that we discussed before, to turn back to you and see if you can share with us something that you have seen in the demo vehicle that you were talking about before.
So I got to town Monday, and early Tuesday morning, I got to go on one of the first rides into Audis that has the Intel, Mobileye, and Delphi technology. And they took us on the Strip and around Vegas, and then we merged onto I-15, and then came off I-15, so we're on the highway. And I wasn't scared. My colleagues have done this, and they've survived, you know, so I'm like, you know, it was very enlightening. And then we were just pulling up to a stoplight, and I noticed that we weren't tailgating. And if any of you are from Washington, D.C., I mean, I think everybody tailgates there, and it just drives me crazy. And I was thinking, well, one theme of this story could be we might have the end of tailgating if we had autonomous vehicles. And then about that time, a car on the right, driven by a human, tried to cut in on us like they should not do, and the car just stopped. And all of us, we all had our seatbelts on. I had 2 other journalists in the back seat, and we all kind of looked at each other, and the engineer from Delphi said, you know, I don't think a human could have stopped and missed that person. And then, of course, my colleagues I've talked about, you know, over the days since then said, this could have been planned. But I mean, I don't think that could have been planned that much. No. What if you actually had an accident? It wouldn't have been worth the little bit of PR it's getting from me now. So anyway, this is still going on, and I think you're doing drives through Saturday, I think, right? It's just across the street over where the big parking lot is. And they're doing there's other technology demos there, but it really brought home the potential of this, you know. So we've talked a bit about what you guys' strategies are. What needs to happen to get us from where we are today to this future, you know, in your company, you know, for each of your companies? You know, is it regulatory? Is it just more testing? Is it more partners? And talk a bit about that.
Well, in order to really have a non-jerking, smooth experience that are truly safe and have all the advantages of autonomous-driven cars and connected cars, the infrastructures are completely missing today. We all do test drive. We have a test track here also in a very controlled environments. And yes, you know, you have people could cut in front of you, but to realize the reason of doing autonomous driving and all the benefit of it, the infrastructures anywhere from, I was earlier with another gentleman in the speaker room. We're chatting about 5G, and then there's a parallel session going on 5G, and we, you know, and Doug talked about 5G just now. Right? So there is a whole bunch of information that we needed to make sure that we have a safe and secure and smooth drive, that you don't become a problem rather than solving a problem. And so that infrastructure is needed. The problem with that is 5G is not going to be as ubiquitous as most people think, because, you know, your car, unless you're only going to be in the urban centers, you know, assuming you want to take a ride to a beach, to a forest or whatever, how do we do the handoff? You know, or is it you expected everything to be 5G cover in full strength that even today on 4G you don't get? And so I think there's a lot of these fringe and glitch conditions that lots of technology needs to be developed. So that's one aspect. Infrastructure needs to be developed. Sensor on the road, street sign, even things like people told me about, you have a street sign, a signal with graffiti on it. How do you recognize and distinguish that? Those are things. No, I'm not saying that therefore it's not solvable. We will solve it as multiple industry will come together and solve that. That's not the issue. It's going to happen. But it's going to happen to a little bit longer than most people think. And I heard all the stack that you talk about. Probably sensible in some ways, but it's going to take a little longer. And then finally, the biggest issue, I think, is going to be the government. We don't have any regulatory framework, really, that I think makes a lot of sense. Today, we're still multiple technology company, industries trying to solve this experience problem. And I know there are multiple agencies who want to get ahead of like National Highway Safety people. The problem with that is they're putting the cart in front of the horse. Because once you define the rules today before we solve the problem, you kind of dictate what the outcome is going to be, which may not be the optimal. So I would suggest that there's multiple stages of this. I think the infrastructure, the government policy that comes at the right time, the collaborativeness of that. And BlackBerry focused mostly on secure communications within the cars and outside the car. And so there's a whole lot of things there relating to privacy we have to solve also. So it's not just about the rules on the road that we have to worry about. So anyway, so exciting area, lots of things going on, number of companies. In fact, if you go talk to, I spoke to AT&T, and they're in the car business, right? We saw what Verizon did, acquire 2 fleet management company most recently. They're in the car business, and everybody's in the telematic business. The chip company is in the business, the algorithm company and the software company, the big data company. So I think this is the problem. We will solve it as an industry. It's the right thing to do. But it's going to take a lot longer than most people think.
You guys want to chime in on that?
So let me build a little bit on what John talked about. You mentioned a few things that have to come together, and we can add a lot more to the list. John touched on privacy and security, regulatory environment. But when you look at the problem that we're trying to solve with regards to autonomous vehicle, it's really the convergence of a lot of other things that we're talking about and the industry is developing. It's the Internet of Things, and it's artificial intelligence all wrapped together. And you think about the infrastructure that's necessary to enable the Internet of Things. We always define that as things that get connected back to the data center or cloud. That's necessary for autonomous vehicles. Artificial intelligence will require a model that's built in the data center that's trained with massive amounts of data, and the inference gets pushed back out into a thing that's going to deploy that functionality, in this case, a car. And so that thing to connectivity to cloud is happening even beyond autonomous vehicles. And so I think a lot of the security, privacy, those things are going to need to be solved in order to realize the promise of some of these other big things that we've been talking about as an industry for a while. But in terms of regulatory, this is going to be interesting for the next few years. We've been active working with many of those regulatory agencies, Department of Transportation, NHTSA. I've had the unique experience of testifying in front of Senate committees on the topic. And we're really pleased with how the Department of Transportation and NHTSA have approached this so far. And in terms of discussing guidelines as opposed to putting regulations in place, I think that's really important at this stage of the technology. They're also gathering input both from the automotive industry, of course, as they normally would, but also reaching out to technology players as well and trying to seek that input and shaping some guidelines and providing some direction as opposed to enacting laws at this stage. And we think that's really important, that we have these public-private partnerships to really define what's necessary in terms of in terms of infrastructure, in terms of privacy guidelines, security guidelines, and that'll allow the technology to move at the pace of innovation. And at that point, then I think it'll become more appropriate to start putting regulations in place.
Okay, so I would like to comment on that and discuss also what are the building blocks that are needed. In principle, when you're making such a big shift, one may need to have some sort of scientific revolution that would allow us to go into the domain of autonomous vehicle. And luckily, and the good news for us is that we don't see that as necessary, because what the tools that are needed are already addressed and solved, and we have them here with us. What is needed is to do somewhat more of a technological revolution or technological improvement. Taking, for example, two subjects that can highlight this case. One of them is tightly related to the demo vehicle that was discussed before. That demo vehicle already have within it the mapping that was created in order to allow it to do autonomous vehicle. That was done by just sending another vehicle to do a few rounds around Las Vegas. The relevant data was collected, and we're talking about very little data that was collected about landmark along the road that allow us later to locate ourselves in the world. And that was kept in a very small database. We're talking about 10 kilobytes per kilometer. And later on, when that vehicle was driving, it was using that same information projected on the road. That's what, when you're driving now with the vehicle, you are able to see. And therefore, you're able to see if that was so easily done and within a short time in Vegas, how that can be done in a much larger scale. And in a few years, that mapping would be available all around the world, given the fact that, as I said before, it's cost almost insensitive, and we see that has been installed in something like 2 million vehicles in 2 years. That's sort of one example. The other case is that not yet installed in that vehicle, but one can see that in our demo, is what we call the driving policy that allow vehicles to navigate and maneuver within real life condition. And again, we were able to show in a very short time how this could happen, how this is working. And the good news is that it will enable us pretty soon to have an autonomous vehicle on the road. And to conclude that, and again, referring to the revolution or the change that we are talking, you mentioned in the beginning several elements that has to do with how autonomous vehicle is going to change our life, and you mentioned the fact that it's going to save life. That's clear. There's also the issue of shared mobility. That's also going to be a major factor in our life. But another very interesting element is the fact that AI technology, which was mentioned by the previous speakers, is something that is quite mature in the academy today. And it's basically looking for the right application. And we do see that autonomous vehicle is the right application for AI, for artificial intelligence. And again, to conclude with good news, what we see is that in all cases where such new technology was put into practice, it always brought into life also other ideas that we were not able to perceive before. I mean, we can easily understand what it would mean to save lives. We can easily or try to think what it would mean to do shared mobility. The application of AI in robotic vehicle would definitely bring new ideas and new thoughts about how to take that intelligence and provide us, the user of the system, something more that today is not something that we can think of.
Ite, you mentioned something I'd like maybe the other two guys to touch on. You know, why do we want to do this? What are some of the advantages that could be accrued? And then also, are there some disadvantages, or are there things that you guys are getting pushback, you know, from whether it's regulators or cities or whatever?
I don't think pushback is the right description of it. I think everybody's concerned about safety. And I think USA Today has carried one article with two guys sitting in a family room or something, and using laptops, and crash a Jeep down into a ditch. I remember that article very well. And every time, I think you have to all realize that this is a computer a moving computer. And there's so many lines of codes. I wouldn't be surprised there's 100 million lines of code in there. And there are various different modules, so those, we are tightening the modules. There are communication inside the vehicle and outside the vehicle. And every time there are communications, there are hackable surfaces, so to speak. And so we spend most of our time working on that. I think the negative, all the positives, everybody knows. I don't, save gas and save times and make productivity, save life. There are 20% of all the fatal accidents in car today are drunk driving. We should be able to eliminate just that. I mean, completely, just off the map. There's over 1 million people die every year in car accidents around the world. So there's no questions that this is the right thing to have happen. But also, the negative is you could turn that, if you have a hackable, unsecure set of codes out there, you then run into the risk of bad people could use that for bad reasons. And so we're trying to get in front of that issue. So I think that's more of an issue that's facing us that we have to address, and then plus the privacy. Because then it gets into the whole area of how much do you want to know and who gets to know where you are and the conditions of the car or the landscapes around you. Who gets to know that? Is it just serving your safety or protecting your safety? Does that have the rights to know everything about you and your family and everybody occupants in the car, or otherwise? Right? So those are things that we're tackling. I wouldn't say they're a pushback, but something that absolutely need to be solved because before this become a pervasive reality.
Mike, I think John touched a little bit on the safety aspects of it, which is the thing we always talk about first, right? And I think it's really important to really put that in perspective. Over 38,000 people died in the United States last year in car accidents. 1.3 million people globally, right? And so that's the number one motivation, is that we can make transportation in vehicles running around roads, if we continue to call them cars, much, much safer, right? And if we think about that and everybody goes, yeah, those are big numbers and that's unfortunate. If we compare that to the airline industry, right? Commercial airlines today are autonomous things. And we've poured a ton of engineering into that mode of transportation over the last few decades to drive the kind of incredible safety levels that we have. And it's because those planes go into autopilot at about 5,000 feet. By the way, that's before the ding that lets you bring out your laptop and get back to work, right? And so when we think about it in comparison, and the fact that over 90% of all auto accidents are caused by human error, that's the big opportunity. But as we start to think about what else is possible, think about parking, right? An autonomous vehicle can drop you off and then go park itself, right? We'll reduce the amount of real estate in cities being consumed by parking because they can park a couple inches apart. Think about congestion on the roads. We think about, even at some point as the population of autonomous vehicles reaches a certain level, things like traffic lights will start to become obsolete. And so we think about all the different benefits beyond just safety and reducing emissions. There are so many others that are just really exciting.
And the test that was done here, obviously Las Vegas or Nevada or whoever was willing to let this test happen on the streets, and then whatever other tests are happening here at CES. And that is because why? I mean, maybe it's kind of a simple question, but why would they want to have that happen here and let people know that they're allowing that on the streets?
They probably want Tesla to build another plant here. I think it's more commercial driven than not,
Gotcha.
for the current government.
Gotcha.
Well, I think some of that may have to do with infrastructure and kind of the layout of the urban environments as well. There are some areas that are very dense urban environments, and it's maybe a little more challenging to do testing. Or other places, I happen to live in Phoenix, and we see a lot of testing happening there. It's more geographically dispersed. Phoenix is laid out in kind of a grid. It's a little bit more a conducive environment. So I think different geographic areas maybe more conducive to some of that testing. And certainly it's going to be a state-by-state decision. We're already starting to see that shape up.
Someone mentioned ride sharing, and I'm kind of wondering, who do we think is going to buy these first autonomous vehicles? Are they going to be the people that buy a Tesla? Are they going to be like early adopters? Will they be cities? Will they be Uber? Will they be commercial ventures that, you know, provide, you know, a car that all of us could share and not actually own one? What are your thoughts?
So what we see, and that's also tightly coupled with the advantages that we see of autonomous driving, is that when it is possible to show that autonomous vehicles are reliable enough and they would start showing us the benefit of saving life, the next immediate benefit would be the shared mobility, and we expect that to be taken by just everybody. We know that the major cost related in transportation is the human resources that are needed in order to drive the cars, and when we are able to show that these vehicles are reliable enough and they can drive us within cities, we would see immediate drop in the cost related that can be translated to other things. If you combine that together with the fact that utilization of vehicle in current cities is very low, we're talking about something like 4% of the time. The rest, the vehicle is just standing there. We need to provide it a parking place. We need to verify that during congestion it is able to move, but most of the time it's standing still. If you combine both of them, you're going to see a huge impact in terms of cost and in terms of our mobility in large cities that immediately many people would start seeing.
Well, and you wouldn't have to go to the DMV. The car would do it itself,
Yeah.
right? We wouldn't have to do that.
Yeah.
I'm all for it at
The
this point.
driver license concept is an interesting concept for the future, but so is I think the big change is going to come to our insurance business. Who actually has the liability? Again, this is, now the government policy has to step in. But I just want to make sure that everybody knows, you see all the beautiful cars at the floor? We will all want to own ours, even if it's autonomous. And we're probably going to leave, you know, sleeping bag, coffee mug, and whatever in the stuff that we own. So, I mean, yes, I think ride sharing or sharing a vehicle, because now the reason why the public transportation doesn't go at all the way is because they have fixed route. This no longer has a fixed route, so which is the good thing. And I think that utility, that usage is going to go up as Uber's type is going to go up. And but I think some of us going to, and some reasonable segment of us will want to own our own autonomous driven car.
Okay, but adding also onto that, again, something that you stated before, that it is expected that at first that capabilities would be limited to certain locations. And actually, the vision that we are trying to push in the current cooperation that we're building is a way to see how to do that basically everywhere pretty quickly. And the key to that is, of course, related to data and getting the relevant information. But again, the good news is that we do see clever ways of collecting that. I've been mentioning that regarding how to collect mapping data, given that one can use the infrastructure available already today for ADAS system. But another good example is if we want to put vehicles on the road that would be able to drive in human-like manner, we should take also into account that the human-like manner could be different in different locations. I mean, the driving where I come from in Israel might be slightly different than the one that you might expect in the vicinity here in California, and might be, to some extent, similar to what you see in Boston, for example. And again, the issue is that one needs to have the relevant data that would allow to teach those systems to learn them, to make them understand how to drive in a human-like manner, but that human-like manner could be varying. And again, a cooperation and getting data from the various locations, testing that. Testing, by the way, how to create a human-like driving is a far from trivial task, because your system is also affecting the way other drivers are behaving. Therefore, you need to take that into account. So many challenges, but the news and the good news that we are providing here is that this is feasible given the level of cooperation that we are creating, given the ability to get data worldwide.
And I think Ite hits on something that's really important in how people think about these autonomous vehicles is it's the ability to take sensor data from various different camera, radar, LiDAR to define or kind of paint the environment around the vehicle, to overlay that high definition map, because there may be certain environmental situations that don't provide the level of accuracy that the high definition map can now augment. And then to define that behavior. And that's through that machine learning or deep learning model that gets developed and trained with lots and lots of data that defines how it's going to behave in terms of the decisions the vehicle will make, the computing that's required in the vehicle. And as Ite described, I think that creates that opportunity to provide the behavior that's going to be appropriate, especially while we have autonomous vehicles navigating with a lot of human drivers around them, and being able to modify and adjust that model consistent with the geographic location where that's taking place.
And you know, I mean, it's obviously agreeable with that, but this panel should merge with the 5G panel. Because the only way to realize this is to have the car, the whatever you call it, the unit is constantly communicating, and that needs is absolutely there. Whether it's with each other that's around you, with the map, with whatever, it's constantly communicating. The detour, if there is a road that in a more of a suburban area, if there's a road that have a police person, police robots, let's say, redirecting, all these things are happening. Those interruption needs to be constantly updating. So the question really is, like today, you know, I don't know how many people uses Wi-Fi as a, you know, voice over Wi-Fi, and then you'll be talking, and then you'll be getting into your car, and you start your car, you start driving, and it picks up when your speaker, whatever it is, and boom, it cut off to cellular. That handshake, in order to, if you wanted to have a seamless, reliable handshake, it's expensive. Okay, and I doubt very much that too many of us actually have it inbuilt into our car, but maybe we do. But so those problems need to be solved. So if we just look at the vehicle itself, absolutely agree with everything was said. But I worry about the vehicle-to-vehicle communication and the vehicle-to-infrastructure communication. And of course, I talk about security, but that, in addition to that, and again, I truly believe it will be solved, no question about that. And I just want to caution the fact that this is not going to be like tomorrow morning type thing.
Mm-hmm. We've talked about how probably every auto company and every tech company is involved in this field in some fashion. Do you think that having, you know, everybody working on it on their own is beneficial, or would it be better to have like a space race situation and have more people, more firms working together to get there possibly faster? Or is the differentiator that comes from different parties working, is that more valuable?
I'll start first. I think it's much more valuable for us to all work together. There's no question. Let's first define the basic and the technology and all the infrastructure around it that drives the policy and the regulation decisions. Once that is settled, then everybody could go space race it. And because if we start, you know, creating like the 110 versus 220 vote conversation again around the world, and there's only 2 standard rather than X number standard, I think it takes a lot away from all the benefit that one could have, because we want the vehicle to be able to communicate with each other the same way. We want the vehicle to communicate with the infrastructure the same way. We want the map to be the same way. That got to be that standard. You know, otherwise, you're going to solve many problems many times over. So I will advocate that we all work together.
And I think we've seen many times in certainly the history of the tech industry, when we can all work together to go solve a problem, right? We can use the collective capabilities of the industry. We can move much faster. We can evolve that solution to be much more robust in a much shorter time frame. And part of the collaboration that we've announced, BMW, Intel, and Mobileye, is intended to enable that to happen, right? So we're building a capability there, certainly to provide a solution to enable BMW's vehicles, but we've also been very clear that we want that to become a state-of-the-art platform that can be used by other OEMs and tier ones. And the intent there is, in doing so, we can bring in others to help advance the pace of innovation around that platform and help get these solutions to market sooner and in a more robust fashion. And so, Itay said it earlier, we're really looking for others to become part of that effort in that same spirit of being able to move things along much more quickly.
So, of course, as I said in the beginning, we're looking for cooperation. We see that very clearly on us in Mobileye, where in the past, as ADAS supplier to the automotive industry, it was a very clear type of relationship of getting requirement, fulfilling them, verifying that the product is standing by the requirement of the customer, and delivering that to the market. Whereas when we're talking about the automotive vehicle, we do see a lot of partnership, because that requires to work from day one together as partners on that problem. But I would like to highlight also another issue that was somewhat mentioned before on that topic, and that is the issue of how to verify that those systems are safe enough. So yes, cooperating together would definitely accelerate that, but on the same time, what we should do is do huge amount of testing and verify that the system that we are building are going to address all corner cases. And the example that you gave before is an excellent one. That's a corner case. The system is usually trying to follow up on a vehicle in front of you. Cutting in is not something that happened all the time, but still, that's the important cases that should be covered. And when you're talking about autonomous driving, there would be much more of these and less frequent. And therefore, one should verify that techniques that are being used are able to cover all of that. And the bottom line, by the way, is that the cooperation that we have defined has set itself a goal to provide the vehicle by 2021. And part of that is that even though we are talking about cooperating, being partners, we still see quite a lot of testing, validation. The 40 vehicles that were mentioned before is a critical part of making that happen, because at the end of the day, we must verify that the system that we would be providing would actually fulfill the first element of providing safer driving, to reduce these 35,000 causalities in the US alone by at least 2-3 orders of magnitude. So what we would like to see that in a very short time dropping to something like hundreds.
We're going to go to Q&A in about 4 minutes. I can't really see very well because there's bright lights, but there's 2 microphones out there. If you have questions, you can start queuing up. And meanwhile, I'm going to ask our panel, we've kind of talked about an end game. How do we get to this end game? Or how would you describe, what do you see as a sign that we're on the way to the end game? Is there a one city that is a model that everybody can go to and check it, or is it is Ford going to have, all their, half their cars will be autonomous? Or maybe take a second look in your crystal ball and tell us, how do we know when the end game is coming, and when do you think that's going to be?
Well, earlier, Itay said something about 2021, and I think the whole automotive industry, all the OEMs are all gunning around somewhere between 2020 and 2025, where the majority of the car that's come out is going to be level 4+, which is either the autonomous driven or near autonomous driven, which is you might need a emergency override situation. But I personally think that going to make tremendous progress towards that time. I have to find a way to make the hybrid works. Meaning that I think for us to believe that every car come out going to be autonomous driving, even if you replace all the cars, probably take 10 years on the road. And so within that period of time, maybe it's going to be accelerated because everybody loves it, and it's the new, that kind of the new in thing to have. And it will take multiple number of years. So my suggestions, my crystal ball, you're going to add 7 years to 2010 or whatever, 2021. So I think for for it to be more pervasive, for cities to be more pervasive, started with the urban city first. It's going to be a 2025, 20 to 2030 reality.
John hit the nail on the head, right? The industry has kind of gravitated around this date of 2021. That's when we'll start to see fully autonomous vehicles in volume production begin to be, put out on the roads. But bear in mind that there'll be a bit of an evolution. We're starting to see a lot of driver assist functions today. We're going to start seeing more and more, right? There's that progression from level 2 to level 3, level 4, level 5. And so we're going to see that progression between now and then. And I think we'll see it first in meaningful numbers around the whole notion of mobility on demand. That's where we'll see it first.
So just to give some more data, and I completely agree with my colleagues that we are going to launch already this year with Audi Level 3, the first one on the market, and we do see at least 5 more already defined for the coming few years. So we are completely there in terms of providing a gradual solution that's starting to happen now. The Level 4 or Level 5, as said, we see them coming in 2021, and already for them, we do see something like 5 agreements already defined. Some of them were even announced during CES here, the one that we have with NIO, for example, and therefore, we are quite certain that that timetable could be reached as long as we keep all the ingredients that we have defined in place and continue to take the action that we are currently taking.
All right, I see silhouette. So the first silhouette, please give us your question.
Thanks, and thanks for a really informative discussion. One of your questions was about what kind of infrastructure is needed in order to safely operate automated vehicles. I want to start the discussion by noting that Google, when it was still Google, asked only for well-painted stripes as sufficient infrastructure to operate automated vehicles safely. Each of you responded to a different appreciation of what infrastructure meant to you. And so I'd like each of you to go back to your response and be clear. Are you talking about physical infrastructure, virtual infrastructure, communications infrastructure, or painted stripes?
So for us, in terms of the infrastructure needed, we should be able to do that on the existing infrastructure, not waiting till something would be out there. I mean, people were talking in the past a lot about car-to-car communication, about car-to-infrastructure communication. That's great. When that would happen, that would consist another layer of the offering that should be there in terms of autonomous vehicle, but that cannot be the factor that would limit us in that respect. And therefore, we see that the existing infrastructure should be sufficient. And what we were able to show so far, that the ADAS system are able to provide the required safety level with existing infrastructure. So that is given also when lane marks are not given at the highest quality, and also in not so perfect environment, meaning also in rain and when there's some fog, etc. So the clear notion that when we're talking about autonomous driving, that it would be with existing conditions.
And I would agree. I think in order for us to deploy these kinds of vehicles, these capabilities, we can't wait for the infrastructure to be changed in order to progress the technology. We've got to be able to deliver these kinds of solutions with the existing infrastructure. I think as we go forward, there are opportunities as that infrastructure evolves to take advantage of what these vehicles will be able to do. We touched on 5G a couple minutes ago. As that infrastructure builds out, and we put that technology into cars, we're going to now create enormous bandwidth between the vehicle and the data center to be able to move data and make those models more intelligent, but we'll also be able to consume a lot more media. That Morgan Stanley report that Mike mentioned earlier also cites that the media industry will probably see about a $5 billion a year benefit from fully autonomous vehicles because we'll have time on our hands to do other things. And so as that 5G infrastructure builds out anyway, these vehicles will certainly take advantage of it. And that technology will also enhance this vehicle to vehicle or vehicle to infrastructure. Imagine if there's black ice on the road and it ends up in a 30-car pileup. In the future, with that technology, the first car that detects that can notify all the other cars and they can adjust accordingly. And so I think it's more, as the infrastructure evolves, as 5G deploys, we can take advantage of it.
Yeah, my thing mostly is focused on safety. And so the infrastructure that we talked about earlier, Doug talked about earlier, is something that we're very focused on and interested in. I would agree with the fact that it would have to develop in parallel. So because we can't just set that we're going to have a new infrastructure before any of these things works. So it will be a gradual process. It's going to be in kind of a lockstep process between the two.
And I'm not an expert on the level of these guys, obviously, but smart cities may help
Good point.
create some infrastructure, especially that they would cater to
Right.
testing and deployment. So, but great question.
Well, I guess the question is not to carry it forward, but what would those smart cities invest in to make themselves the perfect pilot destination for automated vehicles?
Great.
Again, I'm not the expert there, but I know smart cities are working on it.
Right.
Last night, Nissan said they're working with a Rockefeller-founded foundation, not-for-profit group called 100 Reliable Cities or something like that. So I know people are thinking about this. So, next question.
Right. My name is Lynn Atchison.
And could you
Could
speak
you
up a
speak
little
louder?
bit?
We can't
yeah,
hear.
sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Oh,
usually not a problem. Okay, I'll try again. So we were talking about levels of cars, and I guess I get a little confused because I know 3 is assisted, 4 is optional driver, and then 5 is no driver, right? You just don't even have a steering wheel. When we talk about regulations, ethics, infrastructure, are you really focusing on the level 5, the end goal? Or are you thinking there's going to be, I think you said there's going to be steps. We're going to have to go through 3. We're going to have to go through 4 to get to 5. Is that correct? Or do you see us jumping to 5? And then, what are those?
It's good.
How are we
question.
going to get there, I guess?
I think we're going to see both, right? There are certainly companies in the industry that are entirely focused on getting to fully autonomous as quickly as possible, and that's great. We're going to see others especially car manufacturers that are building volume production cars today are going to want to offer those technologies and capabilities as they become mature and ready to deploy. And so I think we're going to see both. There's some players in the industry that'll want to deploy fully autonomous vehicles, certainly in that time frame we've been talking about. And then we'll also see that progression happening with others as well.
Go ahead. Sorry. So go ahead, please.
So specifically, I would like to comment on that, given that the kind of cooperation that we have at the moment is actually tackling both. We're saying, okay, let's see that for the same time frame, we are providing both level 3, but already start thinking about what is needed in order to provide level 4 and later level 5, because that would take time. That would take time to solve all corner cases. That would take time because we do see part of the level 4, level 5 solution as the need to collect mapping. Mapping, by the way, is something that is not smart cities, but it contains a lot of information that currently is not available, in the sense that, again, localizing yourself allows you all around the world, allows you to get the next level of redundancy, next level of information to be working under all conditions. And by the way, when talking about mapping, one can think about further elements that could be collected that, again, would be useful for this kind of level 4 driving. So the bottom line is that one need to think about it already from now and start working on that now in order for that to be ready for 2021?
I think that's a really, really great question, and I think unfortunately, you're asking the wrong panel. I think the insurance lobby, it depends on how strong the insurance industry lobby is going to be. It's a huge market for them, and then the question is, what's the liability? Who has the liability? Then the next definition of who has a liability, I'll get to this answer very quickly, is that what's the definition of a driver? Is a level 4 involve me as a driver, therefore I have to go get an insurance because I only be there to override? I think the insurance company will want me to continue to pay them. And so I think they're going to go to the Congress and in the United States, the lawmakers, and argue the fact that I can't define who caused the accident. Okay? And I don't know whether the machine is, in this case, should it be Ford who provided the car, or should it be, the John Chen who drove the car, or is supposed to be there to do the emergency override, but didn't do it. And so I suggest this is a great question, and I don't think there's a real true answer. You're looking and asking ourselves, and my colleagues have said it, we are a proponent of this technology and make it real. Therefore, the answer is obvious in that case. But I think it's just, we're going to be beyond just us calling it.
Sure. Unfortunately, we have time for one more question, and then we're probably going to get yanked off the stage even as we answer this one. So, but go ahead.
Well, thank God you called for me because I am the insurance industry. My name is Mike Nelson, and I work for a law firm called Sutherland, and this is, in fact, what I am working on for the insurance industry, how to make peace with this new technology and the rules of the road. I would start off with, and I realize we're short on time, but I would start off with, we need to start focusing on the words automated as opposed to autonomous. Yes, I understand the difference, but we are dealing with automated now, and it's going to creep into autonomous.
Yeah.
I bought a Tesla this year, drove it to from California to New York, didn't have one incident, was piloted by the car 90% of the time. We are here already. But what is not here are the rules of the road. And what you have to understand is the federal government is not going to create the rules of the road. They've very clearly said the states are going to create them. So you have 50 state governments, really 54 jurisdictions in the United States, and then you have to start to weave in the major cities, 50 of which have populations in excess of 500,000. That's an awful lot of rule writing. Then you start to put in the insurance commissioners, the Department of Motor Vehicles, the criminal enforcement aspects of this, maintenance issues. There is a lot of there. And yes, your organizations are inventing this technology. This technology will not be used as well as it can be until we develop that system, that legal system. And I think it's crucial that that happens. So it's less of a question than it is comment.
Thank you.
Can we do one more? Go ahead, and if we have to talk while we're walking out.
Thanks for a great session on a hot topic. This question is for John and David. You sort of said security is not so much a pushback. I want to talk about two things, security and latency. On the security aspect, we all know the hackers are always one step ahead, as we've seen with the recent elections. So how do we, can you be a little bit more specific on what we're doing from BlackBerry and Intel perspective in terms of enhancing that security to make it foolproof? And in terms of latency, how do you make sure?
They cut him off, so.
Okay, so I see where they're going to cut me off. First of all, the technique is to reduce the attacked surfaces, and it's a big topic on the number one. Number two, it's not about just preventing the hack, but monitoring the hack. So there's a set of tools and software and cloud-based solutions and stuff to continuously monitor the hack. And thereby, this is the reason why I made a comment about privacy. So on latency, I am not that concerned because there's always a register database on the cloud that is being constantly updated. That infrastructure needs to be in place. Yes, this is why I said earlier, telematics is so important that we will have to have a continuous connectivity. And so you can't just drive into a forest and all of a sudden I'm on 2G or something. Of course, 2G doesn't work, but you know what I mean, right? So those are all really valid things to consider, and that's what BlackBerry is doing.
Do you want to? Thanks so much for bearing with us. Let's give our panel a hand. And
Thank you.